Ethan Walker sat on the edge of his worn couch, staring at the pale blue glow of his phone screen as if it might suddenly tell him this was all a mistake. It wasn't. The email was still there. Position terminated effective immediately. No warning, no real explanation. Just a polite paragraph thanking him for his service and wishing him luck in future endeavors. 15 years of showing up early, staying late, never calling in sick, gone with one click. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his tired face. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft sound of crayons scratching paper at the small kitchen table. "Daddy, look." Lily's voice cut through the silence. Ethan forced a smile and walked over. Lily, 7 years old, missing her two front teeth, held up a drawing with unmistakable pride. Three stick figures stood under a crooked yellow sun. One was taller, one smaller, and one faded, but still there. "That's us," she said brightly. "You, me, and Mommy, watching clouds." Ethan's chest tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She beamed, satisfied, and went back to coloring. Ethan turned away before the weight in his eyes could spill over. 3 years since Sarah died, and Lily still drew her like she was just in the next room. He checked his wallet on the counter. Two crumpled bills, some coins, $34 and change. Rent was late. The electric bill was due tomorrow. And dinner. He hadn't figured that out yet. "I'll figure it out," he told himself, like he always did. Later that evening, Ethan zipped Lily into her jacket and walked her to Mrs. Thompson's apartment downstairs. The elderly neighbor smiled warmly, the way she always did. "I'll bring her back before 9, she said. "Don't worry." "Thank you," Ethan replied, his voice heavy with gratitude. Outside, the night air was sharp and unforgiving. Ethan walked to the bus stop 2 blocks away, shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep into his pockets. The streetlight flickered above the bench, casting long, lonely shadows on the pavement. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what came next. And that scared him more than anything. The bus stop felt colder once Ethan sat down. The bench was damp, the kind of sticky cold that seeped through denim and settled into your bones. The streetlight above him buzzed and flickered, like it was fighting to stay awake. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the cracked sidewalk. His thoughts circled the same fear over and over. What am I going to tell Lily tonight? A few minutes passed, maybe more. Time moved strangely when your life felt like it was quietly falling apart. Then he heard it. Soft at first, uneven, breathing that came too fast, too shallow. Someone sat down beside him. Ethan didn't look right away. In the city, you learn not to, but the sound grew louder. Coins clinking, paper bills being smoothed out and counted. Once, twice, again. Each time there was a sharp exhale, like hope slipping through tired fingers. Excuse me." The voice was thin, cracked, carrying more apology than confidence. Ethan turned his head. The woman beside him looked to be in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. Her jacket was too light for the weather, sleeves frayed at the cuffs. Dark hair pulled back in a loose, messy knot, like she hadn't had the energy to fix it properly. Her hands trembled as she stared down at the small pile of money in her lap. "I'm really sorry," she said quickly, not meeting his eyes. I'm short for the bus fare. I thought I had enough, but I miscounted." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Stupid, right?" Ethan studied her face. The tight jaw, the red-rimmed eyes. The look people got when they were one bad moment away from breaking completely. He'd seen that look in the mirror more times than he wanted to admit. "It's been a night," she added quietly. "I just need a couple of dollars." The bus stop felt smaller somehow, quieter. Ethan swallowed and reached into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around his wallet. Inside were 2 wrinkled bills and a handful of coins. Everything he had left. His mind flashed to Lily, to her drawing, to the promise he'd made, to always take care of her. But as he looked back at the woman, shaking on that cold bench, one thought rose above the fear. "I know this feeling, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone." Slowly, Ethan opened his wallet. Ethan stared down at the open wallet like it was daring him to make the wrong choice. 2 wrinkled bills, a few coins, $34 and some change, every cent standing between his daughter and an empty plate tonight. His fingers tightened around the leather, knuckles pale, heart pounding so loud he was sure the woman beside him could hear it. He thought of Lily's small hands wrapped around a crayon, of her voice saying, "Daddy's got this," like it was a fact, not a hope. He thought of the walk home if he gave the money away. Nearly 4 miles in the cold, his stomach already aching, his mind scrambling for excuses. The woman sniffed and wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "You don't have to. I shouldn't have even asked. I'll figure something out." She began scooping the coins back into her pocket, shoulders curling inward, bracing for disappointment. "Hey," Ethan said before he could stop himself. She froze. He pulled the money from his wallet and held it out, palm open. The bills looked smaller there, fragile, final. "Take it," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Her eyes snapped up. "No, no, I can't take all that. I just need a couple dollars, really." "It's okay," Ethan replied, "please." The word came out softer, heavier, like he was asking for something too. Her hands shook as she reached for the money. When her fingers brushed his, she sucked in a sharp breath. I I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." "It never does," Ethan said quietly. "But it's enough." Tears spilled over then, unchecked. She pressed the bills to her chest like they might disappear. "I swear," she said, voice breaking, "I'll pay you back. I don't know how yet, but I will." Ethan nodded even though he didn't believe her. People said things like that all the time. Life didn't usually circle back with thank yous. The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes and a burst of warm air. She stood quickly, clutching the money. "I'm Claire," she said. "I won't forget this, I promise." "Ethan," he replied. She stepped onto the bus, turned once to look at him. Then the doors closed. The bus rolled away, taillights fading into the dark. Ethan sat there alone beneath the flickering streetlight, wallet empty, night pressing in around him. He stood, shoved his hands into his pockets, and started the long walk home, hoping he'd somehow find the right words for Lily when he opened the door. The street felt endless once the bus disappeared. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and started walking, his breath turning white in the cold night air. Each step echoed against the empty sidewalk, the city unusually quiet for a weekday evening. His stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but from the weight of what he'd just done. What am I going to tell Lily? 4 miles didn't sound like much when you said it out loud. But after a day like this, after losing his job, after giving away the last of his money, it felt like a marathon. His legs burned, his shoulders sagged, and every passing car made him flinch, half expecting someone to roll down a window and ask if he needed help. No one did. He passed dark storefronts, flickering neon signs, and shuttered diners that smelled faintly of grease and regret. The city kept moving, indifferent to his quiet panic. By the time he reached his apartment building, his feet ached and his hands were numb. Light glowed from Mrs. Thompson's window downstairs. Relief washed over him when he heard Lily's laugh drifting through the cracked hallway door. "She already ate," Mrs. Thompson said gently when Ethan knocked. "Mac and cheese. She was starving." "Thank you," he replied, his voice thick. "I owe you." She waved him off. "You're doing your best. That's enough." Inside the apartment, Lily was asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. She looked peaceful, safe. Everything he was afraid of failing at. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "I promise I'll fix this." He sat at the kitchen table afterward, staring at unpaid bills spread out like an accusation. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked too loudly. Sleep never came. Ethan stayed there until dawn, running through half-formed plans. Day labor, odd jobs, anything that might keep the lights on a little longer. By the time the sun began to rise, one thing was clear. Tomorrow had to be different. The knock came just after 8, not the casual tap of a neighbor or the dull thud of the mail slot. This was firm, deliberate, like someone who expected the door to open. Ethan looked up from the kitchen table, his third cup of watered-down coffee cooling between his hands. He hadn't slept. Lily sat across from him in her pajamas, swinging her legs as she ate the last bowl of cereal. "I'll get it," Ethan said, forcing his voice steady. He opened the door and the world tilted. 5 black SUVs lined the curb outside his building, engines idling, windows tinted dark. Men and women in sharp suits stood beside them, earpieces in place, scanning the street like they were guarding something valuable. And then he saw her. Claire stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the cracked concrete. She wore a tailored gray coat, hair neatly styled, posture straight and unshakable. This was not the woman who had trembled on a bus bench the night before. "Good morning, Ethan," she said calmly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I promised I wouldn't forget you," she continued, "and I don't break promises." "What, what is this?" he finally managed. "My security team," she replied almost apologetically, "and my lawyer. Don't worry, you're not in trouble." Lily's voice drifted from behind him. "Daddy, who is it?" Claire glanced past Ethan and softened instantly. She crouched to Lily's height, a warm smile replacing the polished calm. "Hi," she said gently. "I'm Claire. I'm a friend of your dad's." Lily studied her seriously. "You're really pretty," she declared. Claire laughed, surprised and genuine. "Thank you." When Lily returned to the table, Claire stood and met Ethan's eyes. "May I come in?" she asked. Ethan stepped aside, his heart racing. The door closed behind her, sealing him inside a moment he never could have imagined. "This is going to sound unbelievable," Claire said quietly. Ethan swallowed. "After last night," she continued, "nothing surprises me anymore." And just like that, his life began to turn in a direction he never saw coming. Claire stood in the middle of Ethan's small living room, hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes quietly taking everything in. The mismatched furniture, Lily's backpack by the door, the faint smell of cheap coffee and cereal. This place told a story, and it wasn't a comfortable one. "I wasn't honest with you last night," she said finally. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed more for balance than defense. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "I just helped someone who needed it." Claire shook her head. "That's exactly why I'm here." She took a slow breath. "My name is Claire Reynolds. I'm the CEO of Reynolds Media Group. We employ over 100 people. Last night, I was supposed to be at a private dinner downtown." Her jaw tightened. "I never made it." She explained how her car had been stolen, how her phone and wallet were inside, how she'd been left stranded with nothing. No money, no way home, no one who recognized her without the title attached. "I realized something sitting on that bench," she said quietly. "Without my name, my company, my power, I was invisible." Ethan listened, his expression unreadable. "Someone close to me set it up," Claire continued. "Someone who wanted me vulnerable, wanted me gone." She looked him straight in the eyes. "And while everyone else walked past me like I didn't exist, you didn't." Ethan swallowed. "Anyone would have helped." "No," Claire said firmly. "They didn't." She gestured toward the window, the SUVs barely visible from inside. "Those people out there, most of them wouldn't last a day in your life." Her voice softened. "You gave me your last dollar, not because you thought it would change anything, but because you couldn't watch someone suffer." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Uncomfortable. Heavy. "I came to thank you," Claire said. "But I also came because I need someone I can trust. Someone who does the right thing when it costs them." She paused. "And I think that someone is you." Ethan didn't answer right away. The word trust echoed louder than anything else Claire had said. He glanced toward the kitchen where Lily sat quietly now, sensing the seriousness in the air. She watched him with wide, curious eyes, spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Claire followed his gaze. "You don't have to decide anything this second," she said gently, "but I'd like you to hear me out." Ethan nodded once. "I need help," Claire continued. "Real help. Not from people who smile in meetings and stab you in the back the moment it benefits them." Her voice hardened briefly. "Someone I trusted betrayed me. I'm almost certain of it. But suspicion isn't enough. I need proof." "I don't know anything about investigations," Ethan said. "I work logistics, warehouse management." "I know," Claire replied. "I looked you up. You were fired yesterday, accused of something you didn't do." Ethan's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I have resources," she said simply, "and I know what it feels like to be set up." Silence settled between them. "I want you to work with me," Claire said. "Not as a favor, as a job. Full salary, benefits, enough to give Lily stability." She hesitated. "I'm not offering this out of pity." "Then why?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "Because last night, when you had nothing, you still chose to be decent." She met his eyes. "That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could." Ethan exhaled slowly. His instincts screamed caution. This felt unreal, dangerous, too good to trust. But then Lily slid off her chair and walked over, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we okay?" Ethan knelt in front of her, pressing his forehead to hers. "Yeah," he said softly. I think we might be." He stood and faced Claire, his heart pounding. Okay, he said, I'll do it. A small, relieved smile crossed her face. Good, West, sir, Claire replied, because this is only the beginning. Ethan's first day at Reynolds Media Group felt like stepping onto another planet. The building downtown rose in glass and steel, all clean lines and quiet confidence. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and polished marble. People moved with purpose, dressed in tailored suits, voices low and assured. Ethan tugged at the collar of his borrowed button-down, suddenly very aware of his scuffed shoes and calloused hands. Claire met him near the elevators. Ignore the looks, she said under her breath as they rode up. Half of them don't know how to survive without a title. He wasn't sure that was true, but he appreciated the thought. She showed him to a small office tucked away from the main floor. A desk, a computer, a stack of folders neatly arranged. It wasn't much, but it was his. These are expense reports, internal audits, and transaction logs from the past 18 months, Claire explained. I want you to look at them without assumptions. Don't think like a corporate employee. Think like someone who's been betrayed. Ethan sat down slowly, opening the first folder. Numbers, dates, names. At first, it all blurred together, but then patterns began to emerge. Small discrepancies, tiny amounts that didn't quite line up. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. The kind of thing meant to be overlooked. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. This wasn't his world, but betrayal was. He knew what it looked like when someone smiled to your face while quietly pulling the ground out from under you. Hours passed unnoticed. Claire checked in once, placing a cup of coffee beside him. You don't have to rush, she said. I know, Ethan replied, but something's off. I can feel it. By late afternoon, his desk was covered in notes and highlighted pages. A slow, uneasy realization settled in his chest. Whoever had set Claire up hadn't acted out of impulse. They'd been planning this for a long time. Ethan stared at the numbers, jaw tightening. For the first time since losing his job, he didn't feel powerless. He felt focused. And that scared him almost as much as it energized him. By the end of the week, Ethan was no longer guessing. He spread the papers across the desk in Claire's office. Hands steady now, movements precise. Highlighted numbers, circled names, timelines scribbled in the margins. What had started as a feeling had hardened into certainty. This isn't random, he said. It's methodical. Claire leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing as she followed his finger. Walk me through it. Small amounts at first, Ethan explained. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, buried in legitimate expenses. Anyone glancing at this would miss it. He tapped a column of figures. But over time it grows. The last 6 months alone, nearly $80,000. Claire exhaled sharply. And then the robbery, Ethan continued. It wasn't about money, it was about time, chaos, distraction. He flipped another page. 2 weeks before your car was stolen, an external audit was scheduled. Whoever did this knew they were about to get caught. Claire went still. They needed you shaken, Ethan said quietly. Disconnected, maybe even gone. She straightened, anger flashing across her face. You think it was my assistant? I think it had to be someone with access, Ethan replied. Someone who knew your schedule, your habits, your trust. Silence filled the room, heavy and electric. I don't want to be wrong, Claire said. Accusing the wrong person would destroy them. Ethan nodded. I know, I was accused once too. They gathered the evidence carefully. Every receipt, every transfer, every inconsistency. When Claire finally picked up her phone to call legal, her hands shook just slightly. Are you sure, she asked. Ethan met her eyes. As sure as I've ever been about anything. That night, as Ethan walked out of the building, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Justice wasn't just an idea anymore. It was coming. The office felt different after that. Word traveled quietly, the way it always did in places built on whispers and polished smiles. The assistant was suspended pending investigation. Legal teams moved in and out. Doors closed more often. And yet, for the first time since Ethan arrived, the air felt lighter, like something rotten had finally been exposed to daylight. Ethan wasn't just the new guy anymore. People asked his opinion in meetings. Someone invited him to lunch. The CFO clapped him on the shoulder one afternoon and said, Good instincts. You see what others miss. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone believed in him. But the real changes happened outside the office. Claire started staying later, not to work, but to walk with him to the parking garage. She asked about Lily, about school, about the drawings taped to the fridge. One evening, she showed up at his apartment with takeout and an awkward smile. I didn't know what kids like, she admitted, so I got everything. Lily adored her instantly. Claire came to soccer games, cheering too loudly, clapping even when Lily missed the ball. She learned how to braid hair, badly at first, and laughed when Lily corrected her. Slowly, naturally, she began to fit into their rhythm. Ethan watched it all with a tight chest. He caught Lily drawing at the kitchen table one night. Three figures again, holding hands. You forgot Mommy, Ethan said gently. Lily shook her head. She's still here, she replied, touching her heart. Then she pointed to the third figure. But Claire is family too. That night, long after Lily fell asleep, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like survival. It felt like hope. And that terrified him. Because hope gave you something to lose. Ethan knew he was running out of time. The drawing sat on the kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed. Three stick figures under a bright sun. My family written in uneven letters across the top. He stared at it until the lines blurred, his chest tight with a truth he could no longer ignore. This wasn't harmless anymore. Lily was building something in her heart, and if it broke, it would break her quietly, deeply. Ethan couldn't let that happen. Not again. The moment came on a Saturday morning at the soccer field. The sky was clear, the air warm, the stands packed with parents and folding chairs. Claire arrived early, holding a homemade sign with Lily's jersey number on it. Lily ran to her, laughing, and Claire scooped her up without hesitation. Ethan watched from a distance, heart pounding. When the game ended and Lily ran off to celebrate with her team, Ethan finally spoke. Claire, can we talk? She glanced at his face and frowned. You look like you're about to pass out. I might, he admitted, but I need to say this. They stood near the empty bleachers, the noise fading around them. Ethan's hands shook. I'm in love with you, he said. I know it's complicated. You're my boss. You gave me everything when I had nothing. And if this changes things, if you want me gone, I'll understand. Claire stared at him, stunned. I just couldn't keep pretending, Ethan continued. Not with Lily watching, not with my heart already there. Silence stretched between them, heavy and terrifying. Finally, Claire took a step closer. Are you done? She asked softly. Ethan nodded. Good, she said, her voice breaking into a smile. Because I've been waiting for you to say that. His breath caught. I fell in love with you on a cold bench at a bus stop, Claire said, when you proved kindness still exists. And just like that, the fear he'd been carrying began to dissolve. Claire didn't hesitate. She reached for Ethan's hands, grounding him, steady and warm. I didn't come to every game because I felt obligated, she said softly. I came because being with you and Lily feels like home. Her voice wavered, honest and unguarded. I was just as scared as you were. Scared to cross lines, scared to risk something real. Ethan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for months. Around them, parents packed up chairs, kids laughed and chased each other across the grass. Life carrying on like it always did. But for Ethan, everything had narrowed to this moment, this choice. Lily ran back, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Ice cream? She asked, hopeful. Claire laughed through tears. Absolutely. They walked together to the car, Lily between them, fingers laced with theirs. It felt simple. It felt right. A month later, on a quiet evening in the same park where they'd first talked after the game, Ethan knelt in the grass. There was no crowd, no ring box pulled from velvet. Just honesty, just intention. Lily held a crown of wildflowers she'd woven herself and placed it on Claire's head with solemn pride. Will you marry us? Ethan asked, voice steady, heart full. Claire said yes without thinking. Said it like it was the easiest truth she'd ever spoken. Lily cheered loud enough to turn heads. They laughed, cried, and held each other like people who finally understood what they'd been given. The wedding was small, real. Lily scattered petals with fierce concentration, taking her role seriously. When Ethan saw Claire walking toward him, sunlight catching in her hair, he thought about a cold bench under a flickering streetlight and a choice made without expectation. He'd believed he was giving away everything he had. He hadn't known he was planting something. Months later, they returned to the park at dusk. Lily raced ahead, chasing fireflies. Claire leaned into Ethan's shoulder. Funny how the worst nights can lead to the best mornings, she said. Ethan smiled. Only if you choose kindness when it costs you. They watched Lily laugh, unburdened and bright. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt complete, not because life was perfect, but because it was shared. So here's the question for you. What would you have done that night at the bus stop? Walked past, or given what little you had? And do you believe one small act of kindness can really change a life? If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories about hope, courage, and second chances. Share it with someone who might need a reminder tonight, and leave a comment telling us about a moment when kindness changed your story. Because sometimes the smallest choices build the biggest futures.